Good evening and welcome to ITV News. This is Monday night's calendar.
Hello, good evening. Here are tonight's main stories.
A sickening attack. Jail for the man who smashed a glass bottle in Matthew's face, leaving him blind in both eyes.
I try to stay as positive as I can, but I have good days, I have bad days. Some days I wake up and I don't want to be. He attempted to kill me. He deserves a long sentence.
Also tonight, assisted dying. The Sheffield MP who says his terminally ill father was robbed of spending more time with his family and who says he'll continue to campaign for a change in the law.
If he'd had the opportunity to know that he could have gone with the assisted dying laws, he wouldn't have had to take a lonely decision and he wouldn't have had a lonely death.
Your names are known all over the world as the Great Strike of 1984-5 in Great Britain.
Rallying cry. 40 years after the miners' strike, the former leader of the NUM recalls one of the biggest industrial disputes of the 20th century.
And they've saved thousands of lives in our region. As the RNLI celebrates its 200th birthday, we find out about how Yorkshire played a key role in its creation. It was an entirely unprovoked attack which blinded a father of two in both eyes. Matthew Siren was enjoying a Christmas drink with friends when a stranger launched a glass at his face, leaving him with life-changing injuries.
Today, his attacker, Gareth Dean, was jailed for more than 10 years after a court heard Dean had a history of violent offending dating back more than 2 decades. Well, Sally Simpson has been following the case and is live at Leeds Crown Court. Sally, what do we know about what happened that night?
Well, the court heard distressing details about the attack on Matthew Siren, which happened on Boxing Day night at the Revolution de Cuba bar in Leeds city centre. Matthew was enjoying an evening with friends and family, and also in the bar in an entirely separate group was Gareth Dean, who the court heard had been drinking since 11 o'clock that morning and had had around 15 pints as well as vodka and cocaine. In a drink and drugs fuelled attack which the judge today called unprovoked, cowardly and sickening, Dean launched a glass at Matthew's face with such force that it knocked him to the ground. Matthew quickly realised he'd been blinded as blood poured from his face. He was taken to hospital and given 30 stitches in one eye and 10 in the other. Months, if not years, of further surgery will follow. Dean, who's 37, handed himself into police a week later and pleaded guilty to grievous bodily harm with intent. But the court today heard this was the latest in a string of offences Dean had carried out since the age of just 15. He was jailed on 2 occasions for violent attacks, most recently in 2017. Today he was jailed for 10 years and 8 months with an extended period on licence of 5 years. Matthew Siren's sentence is a long road of surgery and uncertainty as doctors try to restore his sight. 10 weeks on from his horrific ordeal, today's sentencing of his attacker marks a milestone for Matthew Siren.
Justice is served anyway. I can just get past this and move on. I need to just focus on myself, getting better. Hopefully these surgeons can fix at least some on my sight and I can get home to my family, my partner and my kids.
Home has been Australia for the past 11 years. A former Leeds Rhinos academy player, fitness and physical challenges have always been a part of Matthew's life. But he's now facing his biggest challenge yet, after a 2-week trip to the UK on Boxing Day turned into a nightmare he's still living.
Well, there's massive changes already. I'm not the same person I was before. I can't look after myself. I can't walk down the street. I can't go for a run in the street. If I'm with my kids, I can't play with my kids. I can't do anything. I'm partially disabled, you know what I mean? It's a struggle. I try to stay as positive as I can, but I have good days, I have bad days. Some days I wake up and I don't want to be in England. I want to be with my kids. Do you know what I mean? It's tough. I don't want to talk to people. It is hard, but I have better days than worse days, so it's okay.
With the help of a specially made lens, Matthew can make out images of his daughter taking her first steps on the other side of the world. Now Matthew is campaigning for licensed premises to serve drinks in plastic instead of glass to prevent similar attacks from happening to other people.
We need to see change. It is such a small change. And I know people say, oh, you don't want to change from glass to plastic. We do it at all sporting events, music festivals, we do it everywhere. It's a small change in a nightclub and a bar to save this from happening to people. And it does happen. It happens to thousands of people across the UK. And it's going to keep happening unless we do make a change.
But his main focus is on making that journey back home. But when that will be, no one can yet say.
Sally, this is the bad thing. I'm here till the doctors say, look, you're fit to fly.
Sally Simpson, ITV News, Leeds.
Our other main story tonight, and a Sheffield MP whose father ended his own life says the current laws on assisted dying rob them of more time together. Paul Blomfield says his father Harry had been told he had terminal cancer and had seen friends suffer as they died from the same disease.
Mr Blomfield believes his father would have lived for longer if he'd had the comfort of knowing he could have chosen to end his life surrounded by his family. And he's joined calls for politicians to be able to vote to change the law sooner rather than later. He told our reporter Katie Oscroft that his father died too soon.
He had longer in which he could have spent time with me. He could have seen his grandson. And he needn't have gone in the way that he did.
Harry Blomfield was an RAF pilot during the war. He was also a football fan and shared his love of Sheffield United with his son.
He loved his friends, his family.
But he took his own life, not knowing how a terminal lung cancer diagnosis would affect his final days.
I think that if he'd had the opportunity to know that he could have gone with assisted dying laws, he wouldn't have had to go earlier. He wouldn't have had to take a lonely decision, and he wouldn't have had a lonely death. He could have had his family around him.
The previous night,
Paul Blomfield has spoken about that lonely death in Parliament. The current law means someone could be prosecuted for helping another person to die.
he'd written final notes.
He acted while he still felt he could to avoid what he feared might be a bad end, as it is for so very many people with lung cancer.
But others say changing laws to allow people with terminal illnesses to be helped to end their lives could be dangerous.
We understand the argument that people are making and why people are making those arguments. And clearly, we all have compassion for folk in that situation. But ultimately, this boils down to a debate about whether or not you allow those people who are very vocal to have that autonomy versus the wider public safety for the vast majority of the public.
But Paul Blomfield says his experience is not unique.
How much have you done what you've done to try to bring about a change in the law for your dad?
Partly for him, because I knew it was something he'd always believed in, but it still surprised me when he went sooner than he needed to. But I think what that really did was simply open my eyes to the wider issue. And I've heard so many people with similar stories.
Paul Blomfield will stand down as one of Sheffield's MPs at the next election, but says he will continue his campaign in memory of his father. Katie Oscroft, ITV News, Sheffield.
Yes, two very sad stories at the top of our programme this evening. Now then, this is Monday night's calendar, and still to come on the programme, a shake-up to the way public transport in South Yorkshire is run.
And it was a frosty night last night with a glimpse of the Northern Lights for some of us across the region. Find out what the weather has in store for this week later on in the programme.
Now, his public appearances these days are rare, but the miners' leader who spearheaded the biggest industrial dispute of modern times addressed hundreds of people at the weekend as the 40th anniversary of the miners' strike approaches.
Yes, Arthur Scargill spoke at a miners' rally in Dodworth near Barnsley with a message for today's trade unionists: fight like we did and don't give in.
He also renewed calls for a public inquiry into the most violent clash of the year-long strike, the Battle of Orgreave, which saw miners and police injured and dozens arrested. Michael Billington reports.
He rallied tens of thousands of miners during the biggest industrial dispute in living memory.
You can rest assured that I'll be doing my job, leading the miners on picket lines, including Orgreave.
And to this day, for many in mining communities across Yorkshire, Arthur Scargill remains just as captivating as ever.
I'm knocking on a bit now, but I still have the fervour that I had as a 15-year-old boy at Woolley Colony. The privilege today is mine. I support you.
As hundreds gathered this weekend to pay their respects to fallen comrades and mark the demise of an industry, the former president of the National Union of Mine Workers joined their march, offering a lesson from history to the trade union leaders of today.
Fight like we did, don't give in. I have refused to go into hospital for 2 medical procedures because I'm not prepared to cross a picket line. The people here today are a demonstration that when you fight back, you can stand up and say, we were there.
When workers downed tools at Cortonwood Colliery on March the 6th, 1984, it marked the start of a year-long strike, pitting mining communities against the government amid plans to close 20 mines they found to be uneconomical. After being arrested in the bloodiest episode of the 12-month dispute, 4 decades later, the former miners' leader says an independent inquiry into the Battle of Orgreave is long overdue.
It's been the time for an inquiry ever since Orgreave took place. And don't forget, at Orgreave, I was arrested and I was also knocked unconscious, hospitalised. The people at Orgreave who were battered, arrested, over 100 people in it was like a civil war. Of course, it needs a public inquiry, but more important, lessons need to be learned by today's trade union leaders that you need to fight.
We heard phrases like the enemy within and mob rule during the strike. Do you think the attitude towards the unions, towards striking, has it changed in the last 40 years?
It's got even worse.
The Home Office says it has no plans to carry out an inquiry into policing during the strike, saying the policing landscape has changed fundamentally over almost 4 decades. 40 years on, the pits may have gone, but in communities like Dodworth, the pride remains.
You'll never understand camaraderie in a coal mine. And that bond will remain with us for the rest of their life. And this is the result of it. That's why we're here today, because we're proud miners.
It shouldn't be forgotten, really, that women did participate. There were a lot of women on picket lines, and in some ways, felt it were necessary for the women who had never been politicised before to participate and to take a frontline approach, if you like. Well, it's been a bit like a Catholic. Once a Catholic, always a Catholic. Once a miner, you're always a miner, aren't you?
Well, Michael's in the studio with us now, and Michael, Arthur Scargill, someone I've got to know quite well in recent years, and the passion's still there, isn't it, 40 years on from the miners' strike?
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. I mean, look, at 86 years old, whatever you think of Arthur Scargill, you can't deny the fact that he still seems to have the same courage of his convictions, the same fire in his belly that he did 40 years ago. I was there for that speech in Dodworth this weekend, and he was on his feet for 40 or 50 minutes, insisting that perhaps the course of the strike could have been different if other members of the union had shown a more united front and supported his decision to continue striking. Meanwhile, on the other side of the strike, we've been hearing from another significant figure, Lord Heseltine, who a few years later closed yet more pits, and that's a decision that he continues to defend to this day.
This was a determination by a group of people to impose their views on another group of people, miners, who didn't want to go on strike, and they were made to do so.
Could Margaret Thatcher have compromised with the unions?
I don't think that Arthur Scargill was a man with whom you compromised.
Lord Heseltine speaking to Lara then. We will hear more on that interview from Lord Heseltine, as well as picketing miners, those who manned those pickets during the miners' strike 40 years ago, on tomorrow night's programme.
We will do indeed. Yes, thank you, Michael. As Michael says, we will be live at the National Mining Museum in Wakefield tomorrow evening to reflect on the 40th anniversary of the miners' strike, which of course had such a huge impact in our region and still resonates today. Now then, the Mayor of South Yorkshire says he wants to take back control of buses in the region and plans to franchise out the services by the end of the year. The combined authority currently pays £75 million a year towards maintaining the bus service, and it says this figure has tripled since 2018.
Franchising out the service will mean that profits can be reinvested, improving standards and allowing the Mayor's office to set bus fares. Campaigners have welcomed the plans. Adam Fowler was at the meeting this morning. Let's join him live now. Adam, what will this mean for commuters?
Well, the Mayor says that it will improve punctuality and reliability. It will allow them to control ticket prices, as you said, but it will also allow them to integrate tickets. So you'll just get the one ticket, you'll be able to jump on either the tram or the bus. And the profits will be reinvested into depots and better, newer buses. I spoke to Oliver Coppard, the South Yorkshire Mayor, earlier on today. Here's what he told me.
If we want to improve services, if we want to reinvest the money from those profitable bus routes in South Yorkshire into those services that are vital for our communities, then we need to take this step. We've done the work. We know that this system is better for South Yorkshire. We now have to go to an audit, and I hope leaders will agree with me to take that step next week, then a public consultation, then hopefully we can take that decision to move to franchising by the end of this year.
Well, the campaign group Better Buses for South Yorkshire has been behind this idea from the very beginning. They say improved reliability is just one of the many benefits that they expect to see.
The idea of fares being a lot more logical, so you haven't got a massive list of different fare structures, very confusing for people to know what kind of ticket they want. But I think that idea of having the control over the routes and the timetables is really the key benefit of franchising.
Well, the Confederation of Passenger Transport says regardless of the regulatory model, passengers will benefit from more investment in bus priority measures and coordination of roadworks. Passenger numbers are still 20% down on what they were pre-pandemic. The Mayor says that this will not only improve services, but in doing so, help get bums back on seats as well.
Thanks very much indeed, Adam, live in Sheffield.
More of the day's news now, and police are investigating a stabbing in Sheffield which has left a teenager in hospital. Emergency crews were called to Shirecliffe Road in the Burngreave area at around 6 this morning. The 17-year-old boy suffered serious injuries. They're not thought to be life-threatening. No arrests have been made and police are appealing for witnesses.
The 60-mile-an-hour speed limit zone on the M1 near Sheffield and Rotherham will be removed shortly. That's what National Highways tell us anyway. The government agency says the speed limit zone between junctions 34 and 33 is no longer necessary due to improving air quality in the area, but says it will continue monitoring pollution levels to ensure they don't exceed the legal limit.
OK, the ITV Evening News is coming up. Here's Mary Nightingale.
Coming up in the programme, as the deadline for a pause in fighting in Gaza fast approaches, we'll have a special report from inside the desperate operation to save hundreds of injured women and children. As Donald Trump survived a ruling by the Supreme Court, we'll have the details on whether or not the former president will be allowed on the ballot this time. And the Northern Lights put on a dazzling display in the sky last night. Just why have they been so active? Do join me for those stories and more at 6:30.
Thanks, Mary. We'll see you shortly. And in fact, we'll be looking at some of your Northern Lights pictures very soon as well. Pretty spectacular. Before that, though, here's the sport.
Zero Accounting Software sponsors ITV Regional Sports Report.
And Chris is with us. And Chris, we've got the Blades versus the Gunners tonight at Bramall Road. Predictions on who's going to triumph in this duel?
Yeah, it's going to be difficult, isn't it, for the Blades tonight, especially against an Arsenal team who really need to win to keep pace with the teams at the top of the Premier League table. But it's the Blades we're interested in, isn't it? And one look at the league table shows you why they really need to start picking up points if they're to stand any chance whatsoever of staying in the Premier League.
They're massively in the title race, we understand that. But we're trying to dress it up as a cup match for us, an FA Cup tie. And one which I said to the players, if it was an FA Cup tie, you had nothing to lose, and let's go for it and give a good account of ourselves, and let's put in a positive performance.
Well, the Blades might take inspiration from what's happening across the city. Sheffield Wednesday have won 4 of the last 5 games and are just 3 points from Championship safety. Ike Ugbo's 6th goal in 5 matches was enough to win the South Yorkshire derby with Rotherham, who now sadly look destined for relegation to League One. It was on as even in the other big derby game at the weekend. Huddersfield took the lead against Leeds through Michael Hellick, but after the Terriers were reduced to 10 men, Patrick Bamford equalised for Leeds, who slipped to 3rd in the Championship table. In terms of the region's other winners, Barnsley are looking serious contenders for a League One automatic promotion place. The Tykes winning 4-2 at Wycombe to move within 3 points of the top 2. And Mansfield moved 3 points clear at the top of League 2 after George Maris's goal was enough to see off Newport. Now, some sad news to bring you from the world of rugby. Lewis Jones, who was a Welsh international in rugby union before switching codes to sign and break records for Leeds in rugby league, has passed away at the age of 92. A legend up at Headingley, Lewis kicked over 1,200 goals and scored nearly 3,000 points for the club. Our thoughts, of course, are with Lewis's friends and family. Well, quite fittingly, the Leeds Rhinos picked up a good win over the weekend, beating Catalan at Headingley, with Ash Handley starring once again. The England international scored another 2 tries to make it 5 for the season already, as the Rhinos won 18-12 against the Catalan side, who won both of their opening games this season. So well done to them. That's your sport.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks,
Welcome.
Chris. Now, it's not only a much-loved national institution, but one which has saved countless lives of those in peril on the sea. The RNLI has been coming to the rescue for 200 years.
Yes, since it was formed on this day in 1824, volunteers from our region have saved almost 2,500 lives, launching nearly 7,000 times. Commemorations are being held in the coming weeks and months in honour of that work and of those crew members who have died. James Webster reports.
When lives are in danger at sea, the crews of Yorkshire and Lincolnshire's lifeboats put their lives at risk. Here, a crew is training to be ready for the roughest seas and the worst weather. When the RNLI started, it was with rowing boats like this one in Whitby. Now, every new lifeboat is built at the charity's headquarters in Poole in Dorset.
So what's the advantage of having the boat in 2 halves like this?
Well, hull and wheelhouse are built in separate moulds, so we keep them separate for as long as possible because it gives much better access, better lighting, ventilation for the staff that are building the boats.
When any of our region's boats needs repairs or servicing, it'll be brought here.
We've got people that were building the hulls and wheelhouses of the 7-class lifeboats when they were built elsewhere 25 years ago, and they've been through all the different classes. The skills that they bring with us and the knowledge of how to build boats efficiently and effectively is amazing, and I think everyone that works here is proud to be part of it.
The idea of coastal communities having rescue boats dates back to the 1700s, but it was Sir William Hillary's vision to create a national service dedicated to saving lives at sea. An experienced sailor born in Yorkshire, he created the RNLI in 1824. Major rescues created national heroes, most famously Grace Darling, who saved 9 lives from a shipwreck. And when Henry Freeman was the only man to survive a rescue off Whitby that cost the lives of his fellow crew members wearing a newly developed life jacket, they became much more widely used. Steam-powered lifeboats were introduced. Crews were involved in both world wars, and in the decades since, ever more sophisticated rescue vessels have been developed. It is a rich history that's recorded in these archives.
So what is this that we're looking at here?
So these are the very first minutes of the first meeting on the 4th of March 1824. This is where it all comes to life, in this pub in London. These men get together and decide what the charity is going to be.
This is such a beautiful page of pristine handwriting. Surely the people who were at this meeting wouldn't possibly have imagined that 200 years later we will be sitting here looking at this.
Yeah, I think they'd all be really amazed and proud to see that 200 years later how many lives have been saved and how we're still delivering on what they set out in that original meeting.
And not just papers, the charity preserves artwork and lovingly created models, which it hopes can one day be put on public display.
It's fascinating and it's a real privilege as well. And we're covering 238 communities across the UK and Ireland, just stories of 200 years of saving lives at sea.
200-year commemorations are planned at all lifeboat stations, including in Whitby, where many of the crew have personal reasons for volunteering.
I grew up just around the corner from this lifeboat station, actually, and as a youngster, you know, when the old maroons used to sound when the lifeboats were going to sea, I used to come down just on this pier next to us here and actually watch the boat go out to sea.
When crew members need training, it is to the headquarters in Poole that they go.
That's good.
There are facilities designed to mimic the conditions faced at sea.
Try not to go too far forwards.
Today, on a boat which only ended its 27-year service as Whitby's lifeboat last year, they're practising how to manoeuvre the vessel. This is an opportunity for these crew members to practice the sorts of skills that they'll be using when they go back home and are rescuing people whose lives are in danger.
They're doing great this week. It's only day 2 of a 5-day course, so we're still on the early stages of it. The guys we've got on this week are all developing on to be coxswains, so they need these skills to be able to keep the crew safe.
What started as one man's idea to make our coasts safer is now a modern rescue service celebrating 2 centuries of saving countless lives. James Webster, ITV News, Poole.
Such incredible work that they do. All those volunteers there, 24 hours a day.
In all weathers.
In all weathers, absolutely. What does the weather have in store, I hear you ask? Let's find out with Joe.
Good visibility on the horizon. TUI sponsors ITV Yorkshire Weather.
Hello again, a very good evening to you. Some lovely sunshine around today, and after a cold night last night, tonight won't feel as cold. We have a band of rain moving in, and after that our weather will settle down. Certainly over the next few days, drier conditions and feeling less cold midweek before the colder pull of air just wins over by the time we get to Friday. The next couple of days though, no real problems with frost or ice, and then by Friday the potential for a few wintry showers up on higher ground. Back to this evening, winds pep up over the next few hours. It's breezy, increasingly cloudy and damp as showery rain moves up from the southwest, becoming more persistent and widespread into the early hours of tomorrow morning, but also moving its way northwards and eastwards, so leaving behind drier conditions behind it, low cloud, quite a good deal of mistiness and fog, no doubt, before tomorrow morning, and temperatures just dipping a little bit before dawn as that rain clears. On to tomorrow, the sun will be rising at 6:44. It sets at 5:53 tomorrow evening. Tomorrow it could be a little bit misty, murky and damp perhaps where you are to start the day as that rain band begins to push away quite early on. By around 9, 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, skies are turning blue. Winds are a good deal lighter. It's going to feel pleasant in the sunshine and should stay dry tomorrow afternoon despite a little bit of a build of cloud later on in the day. Temperatures will quite readily get to around 10 or 11 Celsius tomorrow afternoon. Looking ahead to the next few days, fairly settled conditions. Good news for just allowing the ground to absorb some of the water we've had recently. Potentially a few wintry showers though up on higher ground Thursday night into Friday as that air turns colder. Bye-bye.
TUI sponsors ITV Yorkshire Weather.
Thank you very much, Joe. Now, before we go, let's take a look at some of the photos that many of you have been sending in of the Aurora Borealis, of course, more commonly known as the Northern Lights. And in the absence of Kerry, I've been doing the science on this, and it's because the Earth's geomagnetic disturbance society carries much better at this than me. And the Earth's axis is then tilted at just the right angle to align with solar winds and allow more sun particles to enter our atmosphere. And thank you to Chris, Jasmine and Kate for sacrificing some sleep to take these fantastic images and to share them with us. Thanks so much for sending them in.
Blimey, have you swallowed an encyclopedia?
It sounded like it, didn't it? Couldn't quite get it back out in the right order.
Well, that special programme tomorrow night, of course, marking the 40th anniversary of the miners' strike with Lara and myself. Hope you'll join us. For now, good night.
Bye-bye.